This dough is where it all started. We used the very same dough to make pizza in the first video on this channel, but it doesn't only make incredible pizza. We can also use it to make amazing light fluffy focaccia, the best homemade sandwich rolls that you've ever tried, or anything else for that matter that's in the same bready ballpark. But before we can make any of that, we need to go back a few days. Let's break it down and I'll show you the whole process.
On the first day, we're gonna start by making our pre-ferment, or Poolish. For that, we're gonna use equal parts flour and water, a tiny pinch of yeast, and a little teaspoon of honey. The Poolish ferments in the fridge overnight, and on the second day we can start making the dough. We'll combine all of the Poolish with 625 grams of flour, 350 ml of water, and 20 grams of salt. To get the most out of this dough, you should really let it slow ferment in the fridge overnight, and then you have 3 days to bake with it. Now, in my experience, the dough performs best for pizza on the third day. After that, I feel like it becomes a little bit too fermented and gassy, which will make the bubbles on the crust a little bit too big, which would be perfect for making focaccia or bread on the fourth day.
Now you can still use it on the fifth day, but it's gonna be on its last legs, so try to use it before that.
But that's enough talking, let's get down to it. For the Poolish, we're gonna combine 150 ml of cold water with 150 grams of flour. Adding equal parts flour and water is going to give us a mixture that has, in baker's terms, 100% hydration. To that, we're going to add 2 grams of yeast, and in my experience, it doesn't really make a difference if you're going to use the fresh or the dry stuff. And we're also going to add about 5 grams of honey. This is just to give the yeast something to munch on, as well as give us a slightly better color in the crust when we're baking. Now we just need to make sure that everything is well incorporated and there's no lumps in the mixture. Before we throw this into the fridge, we're gonna rest it a little bit at room temperature. Cover the container with a lid or some plastic wrap and just leave it out there for an hour. This is gonna give the yeast time to activate.
1 hour later.
What we're expecting to happen during that time is some of those little bubbles to form. That means that our yeast is happy and active and it's making little farts. It's time to cover it back up and put it away in the fridge for the night. It's the next morning, and if everything went to plan, your Poolish should look something like this. It should have doubled or tripled in size, it should be very bubbly and jiggly, and it should have a pleasant fermented smell like beer and bread. Now let's make the dough. In a large bowl, pour 350 ml of cold water. To that, we're gonna add all of our Poolish. And we're gonna stir that into the water. Now, you don't have to completely dissolve the Poolish, but try and mix it in well. That is just gonna incorporate it more evenly into the dough and give us a better start to the fermentation. We'll add 625 grams of strong flour, and when I say strong, I mean something with at least 10% protein, but ideally 12 or more. We're gonna mix in the flour, but not all the way. On one hand, we still want these wet spots so that when we add the salt next, it's gonna get absorbed easier. And on the other hand, incorporating some of the flour acts as a buffer between the yeast and the salt. Speaking of salt, we're gonna need 20 grams of it. And I'm gonna make an extra effort and grind some of the sea salt, because I've heard that table salt with added iodine is supposed to kill yeasts. Although, I've baked with all sorts of salts, including table salt, and I've never had any problems. We'll add our salt to the dough and start mixing. All we want to do at this point is incorporate everything and make sure all the ingredients are well hydrated. We're not kneading the dough yet because, as you can see, at this stage it's still very wet and sticky. We'll cover the dough and let it rest on the counter for about half an hour. During that time, all the flour is going to get hydrated, which will change the texture of the dough and make it a lot more manageable. It will become a lot smoother and it will start releasing from the sides of the bowl. As you can see, this half an hour rest makes a huge difference in how the dough performs, so don't skip it. We're ready to start kneading, and you can do that in whichever way it's easy and comfortable for you. I'm kneading the dough inside of the bowl, using these scoops, pulling it from the side and pressing it into the middle and onto itself. It's A, easy, and B, clean. You're doing it inside of the bowl, so you're not making a mess around you. We're gonna keep kneading for probably around 5-10 minutes, or until the dough can pass what they call the window pane test. That means we're able to stretch a piece of the dough thin enough so that we can see the light coming through it without the dough tearing. If we can do that, then we've built a strong enough gluten network and the dough is ready to be proofed. We'll do our best to form it into a smooth taut ball, cover it with a lid or plastic wrap and put it away in the fridge for the night. It's finally baking day and look how much the dough has changed. It's more than doubled in size, it's light and full of these gorgeous bubbles, and the smell is, well, for a lack of better words, bready. But yeah, technically you could have already started baking yesterday when we made the dough, but that's not the point, and that's not what we do around here. A long slow ferment is gonna give you a much lighter and tastier dough. It's now time to take our dough out of the bowl so we can divide it and shape it. If it's a little sticky, here's another technique that you can practice. It's called slap and fold because, well, that's what it is. And it comes especially handy if you're working with a more wet sticky dough. Once we have our dough ball, we want to create as tight and smooth surface as possible. And for that, the fact that it's slightly sticking to the counter is going to be to your advantage. From this point on, you're always going to want to have the smooth surface facing upwards. That way we can maintain the structure that we've built into the dough. And now it's time to divide it into smaller balls, the size of, well, whatever you're baking. And the goal here is just like before, to create a smooth and tight surface. And you can do that in whichever way you find easiest. You can do a little slap and fold, you can use the bench scraper, or the way it's usually done is you try and pinch and pull the ends in between your index finger and your thumb. It's like making little mozzarella balls. I'm gonna put these on a well-floured tray to relax while I heat up the oven, cause it's time for pizza. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I like to make pizza on the third day. I found that when it comes to pizza, that's when you get the best balance between flavor and texture. After that, the dough becomes even more flavorful and puffy, but then it tends to become a little bit too bubbly for the crust. Which is not a problem for focaccia. I've got a whole video dedicated to it, but I think I'm gonna make an updated one soon, because I've come up with a bunch of tips and tricks that I want to share with you. I think there's already a few people in my surrounding that can confirm that when it comes to focaccia, you can't touch me.
Nah, we don't do this around here. This is what we do around here.
Sometimes, rarely though, I have some dough left over on the 5th day. And chances are, I've already had pizza or focaccia, or both. So what am I gonna do? I'm either gonna make a loaf of bread, or some of these sandwich rolls. Let them proof like that for about an hour, and I'll throw the 2 of these in the oven, just to see them turn into 3.
I overcooked them, alright?
Nah, they were fine. They just turned out a little bit too big to be sandwich rolls, and they were a little bit too dark for my liking. So I went ahead and I made another batch, and that one just hit the spot. So I cut one of these open, made a sandwich out of it, then I put this whole thing together, ate half of it for lunch, and I went to bed. The end. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked it, check out some of these other videos. Otherwise, subscribe and hang around for the next one. Bro.